Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. It is Mile High Sports. I'm Sean Drotar. Sandy Clough is off today. Thanks for joining me. Danny Bailey is the man that makes all of this work. Everything you see, everything you hear, that is Danny Bailey. Can't do without Danny. So appreciate it. This is a big week in Denver sports. Broncos training camp upon us. The veterans reporting to Dove Valley today. An opportunity, of course, for practice to get underway on Friday for the Broncos under their current rebuild. This is going to be a particularly interesting year to follow. New quarterback, same head coach. These sort of things haven't happened terribly often in the Broncos' recent history, at least since winning Super Bowl 50 following the 2015 season. But we know a couple things already, and we'll have an opportunity to hear from a couple of the players in just a little bit. Of course, happenings down at Dove Valley today, media day gets underway, and of course, practice underway on Friday. But the first thing you will hear from everywhere else around is about the quarterback competition. And of course, I'm going to explain this briefly as I can. We've been doing this since prior to the draft. Both Sandy and I told you almost a month before the draft, the Broncos were never interested in J.J. McCarthy. That was always a smokescreen. They were always interested in Bo Nix. That was going to be the guy. It ended up being exactly that, exactly as we told you. Well, we're going to tell you exactly how it goes again. There is no quarterback competition. It's Bo Nix's show. Sean Payton found the quarterback that he wanted. They went out of the way to go get the quarterback that they wanted. Everybody in the league knew that was going to be the case. The Broncos got their man. So Bo Nix is going to be quarterback one. The only question is, there's a matter of time, right? There are situations in Washington where the coaching staff has talked about Jaden Daniels will let them know when they're ready. Up in New England, talking about Drake May taking over when he is ready to do so. The difference is there are veteran guys in place in some of those other roles. Jared Stidham is the most veteran of the bunch, but he hasn't established himself. Zach Wilson has actually started more games than any of the Broncos quarterbacks, but he's considered to be the third person in the group, and rightly so. It's Nix's job. It's just that simple. Now, could Nix lose the job? Yes, he most certainly could. Could he find himself having to wait a little bit longer if he's not going to make the leap forward as expected? Yes, he certainly could. But the plan is for Bo Nix to be the guy from essentially day one, even if there has to be a little bit of song and dance. You're not going to anoint quarterbacks in most cases. Certainly in Caleb Williams' case, the number one pick in the draft, that's happening. But in the absence of that, you have to have a guy who's not the first quarterback drafted, matter of fact, not even close to it. You'd have to make at least an effort to show that he has to earn the position, something Nix wouldn't really have an issue with, obviously. But Sean Payton had an opportunity today to talk a little bit about how the quarterback rotation would work in practice. Keep in mind, the quarterback rotation is not necessarily a pecking order.
Yeah, we'll mix it up again. Obviously, won't stay that way for the long term, but as we get started, we'll keep you posted, and eventually we'll settle into the routine we want.
Sean, following up on that, then does it just go from 3 to 2 to 1, or I guess how do you envision sort of?
We'll keep you posted. I'm not going to sit here and lay out here's how it goes, because I think the mistake made is deciding how it goes. Organically, this my experience I think we'll see a rotation initially, and then we'll move on from there.
Chris Thomas in Denver. Sean, Bo Nix has had the last month to maybe hone up more on the playbook, that sort of stuff. Rookies reported obviously last week. What progress has Bo maybe made over the last month or so?
Look, he's a quick study, so the progress in the playbook will be just like it will be for Zach, right? They've both been here the same amount of time, I think. All of these young players are studying pretty hard.
Nothing you haven't heard before, right? I mean, we heard in the pre-draft process that when the Broncos gave Bo Nix the playbook, the very next day he came back and essentially apparently had it memorized. Now, granted, there's a lot of coach speak and there's a lot of spin. This is what happens when you have a new quarterbacks, new players, draft situations. This is the nature of sports and the nature of the way that sports are sold by the teams. But yeah, Bo Nix, in theory, already knew the playbook before he got drafted by the Denver Broncos. So it's not going to be that big a deal. The entire offseason, he's had it. This is the correct answer by Sean Payton. The idea is to make it organic. Yes, you do want Nix to go out there and earn the job. He is almost certainly going to do it. The situation with Wilson is different. You'll hear people talk about the quarterback competition when they're trying to, come up with some sort of way to hook you and think that there's some drama there. There's not. It's just Bo Nix's job. But remember, the change now with the number of elevations you can have with your third quarterback is unlimited. So essentially, Zach Wilson can be on the team if no other team would like to have him. And the Broncos can just have him active or not whenever they feel like it. So all three are likely to make the team, if not necessarily the roster. Stidham, it was Peyton's choice last year. He's expected to make the team for obvious reasons, and he probably will. He's also in the last year of a 2-year deal. There's no reason not to keep him around and just see what Zach Wilson can do, if anything. That was a dart. It was a reclamation project. Sean Payton is just trying something to see if it sticks, and that makes an awful lot of sense as well. But for Nix, who, congratulations, by the way, he and his wife Izzy just bought a new $4 million home in Castle Pines, a 5-bedroom, 7-bathroom. Sounds very, very nice. It's on a golf cart garage, as one would expect in a home like that, where it is, where the BMW championships next month will be back down in Castle Pines as well. So congratulations to Nix. But he's proceeding as if he's going to be quarterback one. The Broncos are proceeding as if he's going to be quarterback one. There's a reason for that. He's quarterback one. So get rid of the quarterback competition. This isn't about who will win it. Bo Nix will win it. The question is how quickly he will win it and how effectively he will perform. Those are the only two questions that you really have to wonder about the quarterback position. But this is all set up for Nix to take the job, and it always was set up for Nix to take the job. So this is how it's going to break down when you're talking about these practices and in the preseason. There will be a rotation, but as Sean Payton correctly put it, no, he's not going to spell it out because it needs to be organic. If a week in, it's obvious that Bo Nix is ready, then why would you worry about an even rotation? Get your starters reps, get him ready to go as quickly as possible. This season's success, not only the season in and of itself, but how it benefits the Broncos going forward is purely based on how quickly Bo Nix can take over the starting job and how effectively he can perform when he has it. So there's no reason to worry about a rotation. It should be organic. The plan is that Nix will take this job, and when he does, you'll continue to give him more reps, and the rest for Stidham and Wilson will work themselves out. So Sean Payton's right when he basically immediately dismisses the idea that he should share any sort of plan because the players will decide that themselves, and that's the right approach. The Broncos are undergoing a rebuild. Bo Nix is the proverbial tip of the spear of that rebuild because as Nix goes, the Broncos rebuild goes. If Nix ends up starting and can't cut it, the Broncos will probably find themselves with the top 5 pick in the draft, and we'll have to take a look at quarterbacks mentioned yesterday. Guys like Carson Beck of Georgia, Quinn Ewers of Texas, maybe even Shedeur Sanders of Colorado would be in that mix. So there are reasons to believe that if Nix can't get it done, you'd want to find that out sooner rather than later, whether he was a first pick or not, because there's only so many opportunities to upgrade that position. So the rebuild sits on Nix's shoulders at the moment. But an interesting discussion today. Brandon Jones, the safety that the Broncos brought over from the Miami Dolphins, talented player. Health has been a problem. Talked a little bit today about the idea that a young team during a rebuild with little to no expectations. The Broncos, by the way, over and under 5.5 in Vegas. That's the third lowest in the entire NFL. How does the youth affect it? And Jones had an interesting angle that it might be a bit more of a benefit than you think.
A young team, my rookie year in Miami, we were super young. I think we had like 1 or 2 players over 30. So it's not foreign territory for me. The biggest difference is just the eagerness to learn. I think when guys are young, everybody's trying to excel and be perfect and do everything the right way, which is good. And then also people, especially myself, when stuff doesn't go your way, you get upset and you want to make it to where whatever happened, you make sure it never happens again. And I think everybody has had that mindset from what I've seen being here. And like I've always brought up, just the juice and energy. Obviously that comes with youth, being younger. But everybody's just super eager to learn. Everybody's itching to be on the field tomorrow. So it's definitely, it's just really exciting to be here.
Are you motivated by the external lower expectations?
It's never really fazed me, honestly. We are going to be in control of how good or how not good that we do this season. I think everybody's aware of that. You can't really focus on the stuff that you can't control. We can't control how we're going to be playing in week 15. What we can control is how we go out there and practice tomorrow and continuously get better each day.
So when you look at the Broncos roster, Jones talked about being on a team that didn't have a lot of 30-year-olds. Well, it's happening again. Here are the starters on the Broncos, the projected starters, and the starters that you can realistically look at that are over 30. Garrett Bowles, left tackle, more on him in a minute, is 32. Fullback Michael Burton is also 32, if you want to consider him a starter. Alex Singleton, inside linebacker, is 31, as is returning wide receiver Tim Patrick. More on him in a moment. Riley Dixon, the punter, is 31. Mike McGlinchey, starting right tackle, is 30, as is kicker Will Lutz. That's it. The next up is Cortland Sutton, who's 29 years old, as well as DJ Jones, and we'll have more about them in a moment as well, because this is what happens during rebuilds. When you're having rebuilds, you start looking at expensive players and older players, and you start deciding which ones you need, because they'll be critical pieces when you get to be a contender. The Broncos are a ways away from being a contender, so some of that is interesting too. Brandon Jones, in this case, is probably right when he talks about the youth, makes these guys pretty hungry. And that's probably helpful as well. You want a team that is eager to learn, a team that is eager to get better, and maybe even cut loose from the expectations of the past. And that's one of the reasons that Nix gives them the break that they need. When you go into a new quarterback, when you go into a situation where it's an obvious rebuild, rookie quarterback, new players, you moved on from your best player last year, Justin Simmons, for nothing. You've traded away your future at the wide receiver position in Jerry Jeudy. Those guys are gone. Your starting center for the last couple of years, Lloyd Cushenberry, let him walk. Most of those guys went for nothing. You got a late pick for Jerry Jeudy, but otherwise, Simmons and Cushenberry, nothing. So for the Broncos, the idea now on this rebuild is getting on the same page, and that has to do with getting Sean Payton's players and finding out which ones those are, identifying them, and figuring out which ones at least are holdovers that might be valuable for him, that he believes he can continue to build upon, and knowing that in a couple of years, whether that's Garrett Bowles at the age of 32, when the Broncos are maybe ready to compete again towards the top of the AFC, let's say that's 2 years or 3 years. Is Garrett Bowles at 34 or 35 going to be that guy? What is it costing the interim? These are the questions the Broncos have to ask too. So the record they have this year, which will almost certainly be worse than the 8-9 it was last year, might not be indicative of where the Broncos are going. This is very likely one of those years where it takes a step or two back in order to go forward. And for the Broncos, that's a long time in coming. And so those reasons give you optimism for this upcoming season. We'll talk more about Payton's players and about which ones that you're familiar with that may not have a spot on this roster secured in just a moment. But I want to remind you that when you're talking about selling your home, and now that it is the heart of summer, people are out looking left and right. You know the Colorado home market has been crazy for years. It continues to be crazy. There's a better way to navigate it, and you've heard about it right here on this program. My friends Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. When I mention Colorado's Luxury Home Team, a few of you might be thinking, well, I'm not in the market for a luxury home. Well, not all of us are Bo Nix. I get it. I'm not either. But you don't have to be talking about a luxury home. When we're talking about luxury home team, we're talking about your home and the luxury service that you will provide, that you'll get, that the Key Real Estate provides for you. You need experts that know Colorado's market, and that means they need to know how to ride all the highs and the lows. That's experience and that's stability. Well, that's exactly what you get when you talk to Dave and Mark at Key. They're privately held. None of those big companies. You don't get somebody that's just assigned from one of the big names. You're getting them. Privately held, 25 years in the exact same offices. Well, that shows they know real estate. Inventory is still low around the Denver area, as you can imagine. So homes that are priced right still sell very fast. So let Dave and Mark give you a free valuation. Now that the summer is here and everyone's out there looking, we know that there is no reason to wait. This is the most valuable asset that you will probably ever own it when it comes to your home. And you want to make sure that you maximize that if you're choosing to sell. So let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure that you get everything you deserve. Call them today at the Key Real Estate Group, 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST, or visit them today at keyrealestategroup.com. Going to those players, there are obviously familiar players over the last couple of years. Some were free agents. Some were drafted. Some looked like stars. Some maybe haven't been stars. Some have been everything in between. But now that Sean Payton is in charge of all of this, deciding who his guys are matters. And obviously, if they're players he brought in, whether it's draft or free agency, you can assume they're Payton's guys, Sean Payton's guys, not George Payton's guys. George Payton now works for Sean Payton. Sean Payton runs the football organization from stem to stern, and George Payton's job is to make sure that he does what Sean Payton wants him to do. That's the role. That's what the Broncos ownership signed Sean Payton to do, and that's what he's going to do. There are some interesting players, though, that are up for spots that there's probably an assumption they'll make it, but you probably shouldn't assume. One of the things we talked about just a little bit ago was that the Broncos rebuild, and it is a rebuild, whether they want to call it a rebuild or not is irrelevant. It is absolutely a rebuild. When you rebuild, you have to first decide what you need to keep and what you don't. Even though players like Justin Simmons are outstanding NFL contributors, proven NFL contributors, Sean Payton decided that by the time the Broncos became a relevant team again, that wasn't going to be a fit for Justin Simmons anymore. So they moved on. It's not necessarily the best football move for 2024. The idea is you're targeting the future when the Broncos will be contenders again. That informs these players. So let's talk about a couple of them first and foremost. One, Javonte Williams. We know about the devastating knee injury in 2022, 3 different ligaments, not one. And Javonte was probably coming back a little bit earlier than he needed to last year because the Broncos wanted to prove that they could get him on the field. They wanted to prove their conditioning and health experts were better than they were the previous year. And they wanted to see what Javonte Williams could do. The problem was Williams did seem rushed, and he didn't have the explosiveness that he had over the course of his career prior to the injuries. That in and of itself is not a shock. But in the final 10 games of the regular season last year, he averaged a mere 3.2 yards per carry. That's not nearly good enough. And for the Broncos now, you have to find out rather quickly whether Javonte Williams is the guy he was prior to the injury, the guy he was at the end of last year, or somewhere in between. That makes his situation a little bit tenuous because when you look at the rest of the running back room, now things become kind of fascinating because they have added quite a bit to that room. Samaje Perine, of course, is there. You know he's a Sean Payton guy because Payton signed him last year. Jaleel McLaughlin added when Sean Payton was there. They would like to use him more. Audric Estime, injured at the moment, should be expected to be ready to go in reasonably short order out of Notre Dame. A grinder, a player that really gets it done at the goal line. He's in the mix. Blake Watson, tremendous player, undrafted out of Memphis, in the mix. That's 5 different halfbacks. It's not counting Michael Burton, who will probably make the team again as a fullback. So you're not keeping 5 halfbacks. So who's part of the future now? Is it Watson? Is it Estime? Is it McLaughlin? You can make an argument for all 3 of those. They're young, they're inexpensive, and they have their biggest parts of their future in front of them. Perine is 29. So maybe Perine is the guy that's out. He also makes the most money, $4.5 million, and he's a free agent after the year. But Perine is the best pass catcher the Broncos have out of the backfield. He's the best at blitz pickup, and he's been effective at third down. So it really is Williams that probably has to prove that he can be better than Perine. Despite the fact he's only 24 years old, it is really make or break for Javonte Williams, and that's unfortunate. We wouldn't be talking about this except for the fact of the injuries. But the injuries make it intriguing, and it may very well be that Perine and Williams will be fighting for the same roster spot. That part is fascinating. Obviously, injuries can change it. The Broncos hope they don't have any, but that's one of the things to keep an eye on going forward in camp. The other 2 that to look at immediately are in the wide receiver room. One, Tim Patrick, who has missed the last 2 seasons with injuries. Back in 2021, 734 yards, 5 touchdowns, a very good possession receiver. But again, after missing for 2 years, the Broncos have had to build more and more. They've done so. They drafted Marvin Mims last year. They drafted Josh Reynolds this year. They still have Cortland Sutton. More on him in a moment. And then they added Josh Reynolds as free agent. Josh Reynolds, of course, then you can presume another Sean Payton guy. For Tim Patrick, another situation like Javonte Williams where it's unfortunate, a well-liked player, a talented player. Sean Payton even referred to what Tim Patrick brings to the Denver Broncos but keep an eye on how many times he talked about what he said back in June about what Patrick does on the field instead of off of it.
Just those intangibles, you know, I do know and obviously have seen healthy tape. Granted, I wasn't here, but so I kind of have an idea or vision for the player, and then all the other things that he brings relative to his competitiveness, his versatility. He's a great teammate, and I think he's an important part of the locker room. And so it's good to see him getting work, and we'll be smart with that.
So you hope for the best for Tim Patrick. But again, when you look at the situation on the roster, Tim Patrick's necessity is definitely in question. Now, he has a very favorable contract for the Broncos. Now, obviously, gets renegotiated and changes things so there's less cash involved. But the cap hit that he had is still somewhat significant, given the fact that Patrick will be in the final year of his contract. I think Tim Patrick at the age of 31 has a very, very long chance of making this team. Sutton, if he doesn't get traded, will obviously take one of those spots. Reynolds will take one of those spots. Mims will take one of those spots. Franklin will take one of those spots. We know that Payton has a soft spot for little Jordan Humphrey, who was brought in. Brandon Johnson was the number 2 receiver in touchdowns last year for the Denver Broncos. We haven't even talked about him. So Patrick's got a long, long, long road to get back. And quite frankly, were I to guess today, I don't think he's likely to make it. Again, unfortunate, because that has to do more with injuries. But when you hear Payton talk specifically about, I've seen some things on tape, granted I wasn't here, talks about it as a part of the locker room. What he's looking for is productivity at this point. You have to wonder, after missing 2 consecutive seasons, if Tim Patrick at the age of 31 is being looked at as a potential part of the future. Will he get a fair shake? Yes, I think he will. But he's going to have to overperform, because what he has to establish that he was the player that he was before, and that in 2 to 3 years he can be effective for the Broncos as they come back to competition. Those are big bars he has to clear. That leads us to Courtland Sutton. Sutton, of course, at the age of 29, has called his contract situation a stalemate. And even though he led the Broncos last year with 10 touchdown catches, one of only 6 players in the entire NFL that did, Sutton's situation is interesting too, because at the age of 29, with an injury history of some significance and a cap hit of $17.4 million, of which he'd like it to get higher, the Broncos don't really find themselves in a situation where they feel they have to pay Courtland Sutton. So do they keep Courtland Sutton and hope he has a good year and then maybe try to make a trade in the offseason? Maybe they make a cut. Who knows? Could they also keep an ear open around the league and find out if an injury happens to another player, another team, and then they can get something out of Courtland Sutton? I suspect that's what the Broncos are likely to do. They're okay in either situation, because the Broncos are okay with Sutton's contract as it is. They don't have to give him more money, and they're not going to give him more money. So Sutton can perform well for the Broncos, and then they can readdress this next year, or they can find a trade and move on. But the Broncos, again, knowing they're in a rebuild, knowing that players 2 to 3 years from now have to be impactful. Do they believe that a 32-year-old or 33-year-old Courtland Sutton is going to be impactful enough to sign him to a new deal that he's going to find palatable? That's going to be tough to do. And so with Sutton's case, the likelihood is he will be on the team, but the situation might be complicated all year long. Garrett Bowles, the starting left tackle for the Broncos, has the largest cap hit on the team at $20 million. Now, Bowles' position is utterly safe for this year, because they have no one behind him who can step in and make a difference. So there's no concern about what will happen with Bowles. He'll be here. But the question about all of these guys, Williams, Pirine, Patrick, Bowles, we could talk about DJ Jones as well, the nose tackle spot. There are a few other players, but all of those players that I just mentioned are in the final years of their contract. They're all going to be free agents at the end of the year anyway. And that in the NFL is a little bit fraught. In other leagues where the salary cap is a little less porous and things are certainly more guaranteed, no guaranteed money when you're talking about the NFL, that makes things interesting. Could they play things out with Javonte Williams? Sure, they could. They could also save the money by moving away from him right now. Could they play things out with Samaje Perine? Of course, but same thing. Look at the money you could save if you really wanted to. Perine at $4.5 million. Williams at $2.8 million. Patrick at $7.1 million. Free agents at the end of the year, each of them. Bowles at $20 million. Free agent at the end of the year. You're going to want to pay him? You already paid Mike McGlinchey. You've paid Ben Powers. You've paid Quinn Miners. You're going to pay Garrett Bowles too. I think the Broncos are trying to make that decision. And again, they have the opportunity to let these things play out. But for this team, it is going to be a fascinating set of circumstances, especially for those guys that are free agents, because the players we've talked about, for the most part, are older players, not Javonte Williams, obviously, but injuries change that. Guys that are closer to 30 than they are to 20. Guys that are starting to look like outliers on the roster, age-wise, than the rest of the young roster. We heard Brandon Jones talk about how that youth can help. Brandon Jones, by the way, talking like a wily veteran, he's only 26. So these particular veterans find themselves in an interesting spot. They're all with their spots, except for Bowles, in some danger of losing it. Now, in Sutton's case, it would be a trade. But would it be possible that Williams, Patrick just get cut? You bet it is. And so that makes this camp intriguing and this preseason intriguing, because they're going to have to prove that they can do more than what Sean Payton has seen them do. And one of the drawbacks when you're trying to prove that, that's not just Sean Payton, that's every coach that's ever coached. If they haven't seen you do it, if all they've ever seen is something on tape, then to them, it's oftentimes not really real. So you could have seen the 2 700-yard seasons back in 2020 and 2021 that Tim Patrick had and decided, well, I haven't seen that from this guy, the guy that I've coached, the guy that's on my roster. And so to a certain extent, it's easy to just say it might as well not be real, because you're looking for 2024, not way back when. Unfortunately, Javonte Williams was hurt in 2022. You're looking for 2024. So don't make the assumption that because these are familiar names and because they've even been effective for the Broncos in the past, that means anything to Sean Payton, who has on multiple occasions last year made it pretty clear that whatever happened before him doesn't matter all that much to Sean Payton. And while that could seem dismissive, and to a certain extent it is, it's also not necessarily wrong, because Sean Payton isn't going to be graded on coaching previous versions of the Denver Broncos. He's not going to be evaluated on coaching what guys did in the past. He's going to be evaluated on coaching what they do this year, this fall, this football season. So those are hard decisions that Sean Payton is going to have to make. And that's going to make this endlessly fascinating. And we might have the answers even sooner than many of you expect. We're going to turn our attention up to Boulder in a moment, but if you're feeling a little bit hungry this afternoon, I know I am. Now that warmer weather's here, it's time to get outside and have fun with family and friends. And you'd love to entertain everyone at the house, assuming you're very good at entertaining and cooking. I'm not, so this even makes it more valuable for me. But sometimes you need a break from the kitchen anyway, because that way you can enjoy your party. And that's when you need Rolling Smoke Barbecue. Whether you have a half dozen folks, it's just the family, or maybe you throw in one of those big block parties for 50 or more, you can pick up the best barbecue in town from one of Rolling Smoke's 4 locations. They're in Aurora, inside the Stanley Marketplace. They're in Golden, inside the Golden Mill, at the corner of Dry Creek and University at Centennial. If you see me there, and you do pretty often, make sure you say hi. Check out the honey barbecue sausage, by the way, while you're at it. Delicious. And now the newest location is open on 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge. But if you just want to try it and you're headed up to Red Rocks for a concert this summer, you can get Rolling Smoke Barbecue right there. So skip the hot dogs, skip the nachos, get yourself some legitimate, good smoked barbecue up at Red Rocks, and you can get Rolling Smoke right there. Try it up there. You'll love it, and you'll be back going to one of these locations for more. It's Rolling Smoke Barbecue, online at rollingsmokebbq.com. Now, we turn our attention to Boulder with a different head coach, Deion Sanders, in his second season as the coach of the Colorado Buffaloes. They finished 4-8 last year after a 3-0 start that really put Deion and the Buffs on the map. Now, of course, when you finish, well, let's do the quick math there. 1-8, not so much. Crash landed. But it's also worth noting that many of those losses were of the one-score variety. So, 1 year in, what is Deion Sanders as a head coach? We know what he is as a hype man. We know what he is as a recruiter, especially in the transfer portal. We're starting to get a sense of what he can be as a recruiter. Jordan Seaton, the top tackle in the high school class, has come to Boulder and will expected to start immediately. Obviously, the offensive line was a major part of the problem last year. And landing more and more class of 2025 verbal commitments almost every week. Not that it's a tremendously high school tilted class. That's not what Deion Sanders tends to do. The transfer portal seems to be a quicker fix. And the truth of the matter is Sanders has, I think, done a very admirable job navigating that when a lot of people looked at it and wanted to resist it. Sanders realized the reality is what it is. The transfer portal is where you turn things around fast, and he's focused on it. But it's interesting to see now, after 1 year where the national media has had to come to Boulder to pay attention to Deion Sanders, well, they're already tired of it. And the folks over at ESPN, who I guess are no longer content with reporting the news, but would rather try to find a way to make it, decided that Deion Sanders needs to get out of Boulder and replace a guy that, last I checked, has gotten his team to the college football playoff multiple times and championships in Lincoln Riley at USC. But since USC didn't set the world on fire last year, Paul Feinbaum, the very notable, very respected college writer, and Stephen A. Smith yesterday had a discussion as to why Lincoln Riley needs to go and Deion Sanders needs to come in.
Stephen A., I get where you're coming from, but to me it's about trajectory. And I think he's lost the momentum. He had that town. Stephen A., you live there a lot of the year. You have to win in LA, otherwise you lose badly. And I think he's losing badly. And instead of harping on Lincoln Riley, I've decided to come up with a solution. I thought about this the other day. Okay, maybe he does well, maybe he doesn't. But the answer is really moving forward. And I believe the answer after this season is Deion Sanders. He's going to be tired of Colorado because, quite frankly, it's not prime time. He's done well as he can with his son and Travis Hunter and all the Stephen A's and Shannon Sharp appearances. But that's going to dry up this year because they're not going to be that great. But you put prime in Tinseltown, and I think you have one of the great combinations in history. We just got through talking about, or you did, LeBron. LeBron has owned that town as many others before him. And I think Deion Sanders, as the coach at Southern Cal, is the answer to the problems. Lincoln Riley is a good coach. He's got a great resume. Deion Sanders just exudes exactly what that community is all about. He takes the recruiting there, which Lincoln had and then lost. But I think he sustains it, especially now. Today, the Big Ten Media Days is going on with Southern Cal. And can you imagine a year from today, Deion Sanders walks into Big Ten Media Days. Everybody else, get out of the way.
I have no issue with that whatsoever. Zero. I mean, I'd love for it to happen now. But what I'm saying is that as porous as Lincoln Riley's defenses have been throughout the years in Oklahoma and USC, it still didn't prevent him from winning an inordinate amount of games and getting his team to the college football playoffs. So to talk about him like he'll be lucky to be an assistant coach
but Stephen A.
is a bit cruel.
Stephen A., the defense, he's got to coach defense. 56 offensive touchdowns allowed. That was second most of all the Power 5 schools.
I agree with that, but I did say, despite those defenses, he got them to college football playoffs. All I'm saying is, come on now.
I'd be curious to know if USC brass would be open to Deion, because I like that. I like that little marriage there.
Deion and
fits
Tinseltown,
on many levels.
That works. Because I don't like him in Boulder. I've told him that. I don't like him in Boulder.
No.
So prime time, that's Tinseltown, okay? That's Tinseltown.
I think prime time can go anywhere.
Well, that's certainly true, and kind of funny that. Well, first, let's set the record straight about Lincoln Riley. Okay, Lincoln Riley in his 7-year college coaching career is 74-18. That is a winning percentage of 804. The high ranking in the AP chart for every team he's ever coached in Oklahoma or USC, the lowest he's hit is 5. Reached 2 in 2017 with Oklahoma, 4 in 2018, 4 in 2019, 3 in 2020, 2 in 2021, 4 in 2022 with USC, and then 5 in 2023 with USC before they ended up in a nasty, nasty schedule that had them losing to some ranked teams. Remember, keep in mind, they lost to number 21 Notre Dame. They lost to a number 14 Utah. They lost that game by 2 points. They lost by 10 to Washington. It was number 5 at the time. And they lost by 9 to Oregon, who was number 6 at the time. And we know how far they went. They also finished with a high Holiday Bowl berth and won that over number 16 Louisville to finish 8-5. So maybe we could stop with the Lincoln Riley besmirchment here, who's done a heck of a job over the course of his career. But what Feinbaum and Stephen A. Smith are talking about isn't even football. You heard Feinbaum say it. I don't know if he'd be good or not. ESPN is all in on it. It has gone over there at the four-letter. Now, I used to be there, and I get it. This is just Lakerland. ESPN is just looking for drama and clicks and the idea they want just glitz and glamour. They want a shiny object to cover because it's easy. And if Deion Sanders is good, that's easy. And if Deion Sanders is bad, it's easy. And if Lincoln Riley had an 8-5 season and still at one point ranked in the top 10 and then lost some tough games against ranked opponents, but then still won against a top 20 opponent in the bowl, that's not really easy, is it? It's not easy to dissect. It's not easy to say that, oh, well, that was a bad season. That was a good season, right? They just want easy, low-hanging fruit. So, of course, they want Deion Sanders in L.A., where, of course, ESPN has a sports center outlet there. They have a major footprint. They don't have to go very far. They don't have to travel all the way on what is it? Let me see, L.A. to Colorado, about a 2-hour flight, and then have to drive to Boulder. That's a lot of work, everybody. Don't want to bother with that. So, I mean, take Deion Sanders to Southern Cal. Well, I'll tell you what. The Deion Sanders experience in Boulder's been a lot of fun. If for some reason USC and Colorado decided to swap coaches, I think the Buffs would probably take that, whether you get the flash and dash or not. Because, again, Lincoln Riley's career winning percentage is over 800. Deion Sanders has gone 4-8 in Division I. The Buffs' best case scenario this year is probably 6 wins and getting to a bowl game. Maybe you could get a little higher, I suppose. But the question is now, what would happen if the Buffs didn't make a bowl? They're in a new conference. Let's say that they don't make a bowl. So let's say that Deion Sanders, in his year at Colorado, one of only 2 schools, by the way, at D1, that had any interest in hiring him at all, Colorado and Cincinnati. That was it. Because they knew that he was untested. They knew that it was going to be something of a media circus. For certain schools like Colorado, that was a good thing. They needed it. For other schools, bigger schools that have built more successful programs, they didn't need that. When you want to talk to Deion Sanders, you don't contact the University of Colorado. The University of Colorado routes you to Deion Sanders' people. That's not usually how it works. When you wanted to talk to Nick Saban, you still talk to Oklahoma's athletic department. Not every program wants to deal with that. And not every program is going to deal with that if it doesn't come with a lot of wins. What if the Buffs don't make a bowl? What if Deion Sanders has 2 years and 2 losing records with his son at quarterback, who's going to be a first-round draft pick, with Travis Hunter, who will be a first-round draft pick? What then? Well, you could have a hint of what it would be, because the same guy, Paul Feinbaum, who said he had the fix for USC, here's what he said about Deion Sanders literally last week.
Anyone asking whether Deion Sanders and Colorado are close to the playoffs simply doesn't understand the reality of the road. They're not going to the playoffs this year, and I'm not sure Deion Sanders is ever going to get them to the playoffs, because I don't think he has the patience to stay at Colorado long enough. There's so many misconceptions out there. Deion Sanders is the best salesman I've ever seen. I personally love the guy and for what he stands for. But the program looking out has a ridiculously inflated view of itself. I heard Shedeur Sanders, who's a fabulous quarterback, say last week, "We are everyone's Super Bowl." Shedeur, you are not. You are an easy win nowadays. You got off to a phenomenal start last year, beating a couple of mediocre teams that had big names. And quite frankly, you haven't done anything since other than crash and burn. So I know that the media loves this story. We fall all over ourselves. But Colorado isn't important in college football. Deion Sanders is. He's a standalone person. He's one of the most charismatic people we've ever seen. But Colorado is nothing. They don't matter. They're irrelevant in the big picture of college football.
And yet you have Paul Feinbaum, the same guy, talking about it out of both sides of his mouth within a week. So I don't know how irrelevant they really are, but hey, what do I know? I just work here. The idea that Deion Sanders is a big deal, but Colorado isn't, or Shedeur Sanders is really talented, but he's misguided. Don't these all spring from the same thing, though? Who's coaching Shedeur Sanders? Heck, who raised Shedeur Sanders and Shiloh Sanders? So if they have an outsized view of their own impact, well, then by default, wouldn't Deion Sanders? In fact, isn't that part of what Feinbaum complained about? But yet you move him to Southern Cal, and that all magically gets better? None of this makes sense. And it's just talking in circles. In other words, we'd like to talk about Deion Sanders because people are interested in Deion Sanders. But we don't really have any news about Deion Sanders. And so we have to go ahead on one episode, rip him. The other episode, talk about how great he is. Okay, that comes from Feinbaum. Same guy. Within a week. By the way, Deion Sanders has coached no games in the last week. So nothing has changed whatsoever during that span of time between both of those Feinbaum takes. Stephen A. Smith is too busy apparently trying to get into Deion Sanders' ear and tell him that he's too good for Boulder. So Stephen A. Smith can then create the own narrative and he can create the news himself. Okay, that's fine. The question is, what does Deion Sanders want? Deion Sanders want to do more than just coach Shedeur and Shiloh and I guess Travis Hunter and get them to the pros? Probably. Is Deion Sanders ever going to be an NFL coach? No, because NFL coaches don't do things the way that Deion Sanders does in college. Nick Saban tried it. Nick Saban's a better coach than Deion Sanders. He couldn't cut it at the NFL level because he doesn't call plays on either side of the ball. Deion Sanders doesn't either. He neither has Saban's acumen nor experience at this point. So that's not going to happen. The idea is, where does Deion Sanders really go? If he intends to be a coach at all, he was always going to have to get over the idea that he wasn't going to coach Shedeur and Shiloh forever, right? That's not a secret. That's not new. He always knew that. Now, is it possible that Colorado was always a stepping stone job for Deion Sanders? Of course. Of course, that's a possibility. Probably even a likelihood. But the question now is, where do you go? If they don't have monumental success this year, and they probably won't, they're still building. What happens? Deion Sanders, if he pulls the chute and goes somewhere else, by the way, players in the transfer portal can't necessarily transfer twice. So he wants to bring his Louis with him. It can't be the Louis he brought into Boulder. They can't do it. He can, but they can't. So that's a consideration for Deion Sanders as well. Number two, if Lincoln Riley, with his career 800 winning percentages, getting run out after 2 years by the national media, what makes Deion Sanders think he's going to do better? And what would happen if he doesn't? How quickly do they turn on him then? And that's why Boulder's a better fit than people think. Yes, the University of Colorado has a national championship they won back in 1990. Yes, they're back in part of the zeitgeist, and that's exciting. But they're also a program that, quite frankly, if they were consistently making bowls, I think Buffs fans would be happy with that. The reality is they don't look at it and say they need to be national championship contenders year in and year out. They'd like to be a bowl team every year. They'd like to be ranked in the top 25 here and there. And if Deion Sanders could get the Buffs that way, he'll run the town. He'll never have to leave. He'll be a legend. But that's not the way to work if you do that at USC. You have to win national championships. Deion Sanders at this point has not shown that he can. And if patience is a problem, as Feinbaum suggested, how's that going to work at Southern Cal? When after a year or two of not winning the whole thing, despite being in the top 5 in the AP rankings at certain points in each season, the Feinbaums and the Stephen A. Smiths of the world are going to pile on you of being not good enough, saying you've already lost the momentum. You've lost the town. Time for you to go. Deion Sanders were to hop to USC, he's just being the next guy to be replaced. And it might happen faster than it would with Lincoln Riley. So Boulder's a better fit than people think. And I actually think that Deion Sanders knows it, because after Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter move on, and they're working to replace that quarterback position, the Buffs might take a step backwards again. Up in Boulder, they can live with that because the excitement is back. The juice is back. They wouldn't be able to live with it for Southern Cal. And that's why just because you hear big names say big things, it doesn't necessarily make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, you don't have to believe it. Pay attention to what actually happens. Pay attention to the reality of things, as opposed to those who just want to sell you clicks, who just want your eyeballs, who just want you to look at the next shiny object. It's a bad habit. It's a bad habit we run into in sports, and we run into entire culture. Just because something is popular at the moment, just because something is famous at the moment, just because something sounds exciting, it doesn't mean that it actually means anything. We have to separate the signal from the noise. And right now, until Colorado wins football games under Deion Sanders, his future is just noise. We'll get to the Colorado Rockies, whose future is definitely, at least near term, not in much dispute, but longer term might be a little more promising. But want to remind you that if you're looking for the perfect place to work, play, exercise, and socialize, then look no further than the Denver Athletic Club, right here in the heart of downtown Denver. For more than a century as a DAC member, you will get to enjoy top-notch amenities. Now there's a full fitness center, licensed childcare center, spa, massage, Pilates, a golf simulator, and even more. But what has set the DAC apart for so long is its vibrant community. This is a member-owned club, and it's all about you, offering year-round social events, co-working, dining, fun for the entire family. The Denver Athletic Club is truly a club for your whole life. And now for a limited time, new members will pay $0 in initiation fees. Remember, it's member-owned, and you can get in for $0 in initiation fees. So find out what it's all about. It's been the heart of the city for more than 100 years. The Denver Athletic Club. Join the DAC today. Right now, no initiation fees whatsoever. Check them out, the Denver Athletic Club. The Colorado Rockies last night in what basically turned out to be Fenway Park West kept the Red Sox on a bit of a tailspin. The Rockies end up knocking them off in 12 innings, and an exciting kind of fun back and forth game. Ezequiel Tovar continues to stay blazingly hot. And when I say hot, I mean hot. He is now, after last night's game, 3 for 7. He has a 6-game hitting streak. Now, he actually has an 8-game hitting streak, but I say 6-game hitting streak because in the last 6 games, he actually has multiple hits in each of those games. In his last 6, 14 for 29. That's a .483 average, including the walk-off single last night.
Oh, 1 fastball, base hit right center field. Cade scores, and the Rockies win it 9-8. He came with a heater. Tovar did not miss it.
Tovar has absolutely been lights out after going through a really, really bad slump earlier in the month of June. Obviously seems to have spun things around and appears to be, again, all systems go for the talented shortstop for the Rockies. Sam Hilliard, by the way, 3rd home run of the year, a clutch shot in that 10th inning to tie the game, to give them at least the opportunity to win it, because Hilliard needed to do that. Obviously, the Red Sox scored in the top of the inning. Hilliard gets the home run, and he gets it back in there. Not all good news for the Rockies, who have won 4 of 5 games. However, German Marquez placed back on the injured list with right elbow inflammation, according to Bud Black. German's arm didn't just bounce back from the start in New York, which is obviously really unfortunate for Marquez, who has been working his way back. So that's obviously a tough place to be in. But congratulations to the Rockies, who find a way, and you go through the win probability charts. It ends up being almost hilarious at a certain point for this game. ESPN does a good job of breaking that down in their analytics part. And when in the 10th inning, the Red Sox got ahead 7-5, the Red Sox had a chance of winning of 88.3%. Then when the Rockies tied it on Hilliard's homer, their chances of winning went to 59%. Then after the Red Sox found a way to get the lead again, 8-7 at the top of the 12th, they jumped to 61.7. And then, of course, Tovar ends up walking it off. Justin Lawrence with the win for the Rockies. They find a way to get it done, and the offense definitely gets going last night. A lot of very, very good performances across the board. Charlie Blackmon at the leadoff spot, 2 for 6. Tovar, 3 for 7, as I mentioned. Doyle, 2 for 6. Tolia, 1 for 5. All 4 of those first hitters in the lineup with an RBI each. Blackmon with 2 and a home run. As a matter of fact, only 2 starters, Brendan Rodgers at second base and Aaron Schunk at third base for Ryan McMahon, did not have RBIs last night. 7 different players with ribbies. That's a good sign. And maybe the best news for the Rockies, 7 walks to only 7 strikeouts. For the Rockies to consistently get better and start putting up crooked numbers, they have to fix the strikeout to walk ratio that they have as a team. They have been abysmal. Last night, they weren't. Matter of fact, Tovar had no walks and a strikeout. Blackmon had 1 walk and 2 strikeouts. No other Rocky struck out more times than they walked. That's a recipe for success, even against a Red Sox team that is really good away from Boston. They were 29-20 heading into the game last night. The Rockies toppled them, and they do so with a really impressive performance, minus their only all-star in McMahon, who had the night off. Austin Gomber was effective, if not spectacular. 5.2 innings pitched, 4 earned runs, scattering 6 as he did strike out 5, only walked 1. The Rockies pitching staff, again, the Rockies had 7 walks and 7 strikeouts as an offense. They had 8 strikeouts as a pitching staff and 1 walk, the one by Gomber. Peter Lambert, Mears, Beeks, Vodnik, who was really throwing bullets out of the pen, even though he did end up giving up a run, and Lawrence, no walks in total. If the Rockies, more than you don't want to oversimplify things, I get it. But walks are the one thing in Coors Field that the Rockies simply can't have. You can't give them up, and you can't let them go. So when you're pitching, if you can throw strikes, you're going to be in good shape. If you can take pitches and get free bags, you're going to be in good shape. This is proof positive for the Rockies that when they can do that, they can beat just about anybody, and they have a good record against good teams. That part is kind of fascinating. But this was an impressive performance in front of 35,000, of course, a good turnout, in many cases, mostly Red Sox fans. You can expect it again today. But the Rockies with Tanner Houck yesterday, 10 hits surrendered in 6 innings pitched, 4 earned runs. The Rockies walked 3 times off a Houck and struck out only twice. That's how you go well. Only Zach Kelly really held the Rockies down, and did he ever, by the way, to get the game into extras. It was absolutely dealing, struck guys out left and right in the 9th. But for the Rockies, things are really quite interesting. The trade deadline is a week away from today. Now, the Rockies probably aren't going to make significant moves. And could they trade either Elias Diaz or Jacob Stallings? Yes, they probably could. And the truth is they probably will. Both of them are in demand. Diaz more than Stallings, obviously, but you have veteran guys. Hopefully, if you're looking at the Rockies and Drew Romo is going to come relatively quickly, you'll have an opportunity to do that there. But it is a fascinating situation for the Rockies, who simply get during this time and don't do very much. This is a great opportunity for the Rockies, who are going nowhere. They're still on pace to lose 100 games. Maybe they won't. Obviously, they've won 4 of their last 5, but they're not going to be good. They are going to be last in the NL West. That's not a secret. That die has already been cast. This is the time to make some moves and obtain players, especially now that there aren't a lot of infielders on the list. This is the best time to ever trade Ryan McMahon. Ryan McMahon's an all-star. He's having the most notable season of his career. He's 29 years old. Remember, we talked at the beginning of the show about how Sean Payton has to decide with the Denver Broncos starting this week which guys are going to be part of the solution when your team eventually gets good and competes. Is Ryan McMahon going to be that? The Rockies are a long way away from competing, even though there are some promising signs. The answer is probably not. This is the time to trade McMahon, but they almost certainly won't do it. They could get more from McMahon right now than they almost certainly ever could, because there's virtually nobody. There are tons of winning teams, tons of teams in playoff position right now. Rockies are one of the few that aren't. And they could all use a Ryan McMahon, a Gold Glove caliber third baseman who can hit, brings you power, certainly is having a great year. You can get a lot of ways to jumpstart a rebuild, but the Rockies have to understand they're in a rebuild. They don't. The Broncos now, they won't use the word. Of course, most teams don't use the word rebuild, but the Broncos understand they're in a rebuild. The Rockies still seem to feel they're in a weird in-between spot. Jeff Passan, the writer for ESPN, who did a really has done a great job over the years at really looking at some of this trade deadline stuff, had a very interesting point today on the website. And I'll read you some of his quote about the Rockies. The Rockies' major league team is a disaster, and for the talent they've built up in the minor leagues, they've earned plaudits from evaluators for a draft class that starts with the massive power of number 3 pick Charlie Condon. They will keep losing as long as the fate of their deadline rests on the whims of their owner. Good organizations make the most of favorable markets. Dead-end organizations keep doing the same things and wonder where it's all gone wrong. This is the situation in which the Rockies should be trading Ryan McMahon. It is just that simple. That should happen. It almost certainly won't happen because the Rockies like their guys. Last night is the perfect example. Ryan McMahon didn't even play last night. The Rockies had 7 walks and 7 strikeouts. They walked 1 and struck out 7 as pitchers, and they won a game against a Red Sox team whose fans filled the stadium. If you think Ryan McMahon starting instead of Aaron Schunk would have brought 10,000 more Rockies fans in, I don't know what to tell you. He wouldn't have. It's nothing against McMahon, but it doesn't work that way. Only the ownership down to 20th and Blake seems to think that way. And it's the exact reason why McMahon should be traded, as well as Diaz, and maybe even some other players who you don't have signed long-term, like Cal Quantrill, who has value across the league. You need to get more prospects because the major league team isn't good enough to make any noise. Will the Rockies be smart enough to do that? I can tell you already the answer. No, they won't. They've never done it before, and the ownership stays the same. So you don't expect the Tiger to change his stripes at this point. They'll keep McMahon. They might even keep Diaz. And doing so for reasons presumably about, well, we want to pay attention to what our fans want. I'll tell you what your fans want. They want a team that wins. Otherwise, your fans want to just grab the Red Sox jerseys out of their closets and put them on a handful of times a year so they can go on and cheer a team that actually commits to winning. The Rockies have a lot of things that they're doing right. Unfortunately, they're kind of lucking into some of them, but it is going right. Now the question is whether ownership can actually make the tough decisions and focus on getting better. And to do that, it requires a couple things that are complicated. Not that complicated. Trade guys that are almost 30 years old that aren't going to be part of your team when you compete. Charlie Condon, by the way, plays third base. He's not going to take long to get here. His best comp truly is Chris Bryant. Not this Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant that was drafted back when John Gray was drafted and the Rockies originally thought they were going to get him. That Chris Bryant went on to Rookie of the Year, went on World Series champion, World Series MVP, being a legend in Chicago. Charlie Condon is that kind of player. He certainly looks to be. He plays third base. He might be in the majors as soon as some point next year. So move McMahon and get yourself some help. The Rockies probably won't do that. If they do, then there's reasons to believe that things at 20th and Blake might really be getting better. If they're not, then you might have to accept the fact that it's just a tease all over again. The Rockies and Red Sox will go again tonight. Ty Block will take the hill against Cooper Criswell as the Rockies try to win their fifth game in 6 games with good play. And it's necessary because after Boston leaves town, a 10-game road trip where the Rockies generally are a speed bump for their opposition. So how much of this, again, becomes a tease and how much of it is real, we'll find out when the trade deadline hits in about a week. But until then, we'll pay attention to the Denver Broncos, who have their veterans in camp. They will get a little bit out on the field yesterday with tomorrow with the full practice scheduled for Friday. And of course, we'll be delighted to be out for that. We'll be out at training camp every single day with this program on the sidelines of that field, bringing you the latest every single afternoon as the Broncos rebuild begins in earnest under Sean Payton and new quarterback QB1. Stop with the quarterback competition. New starting quarterback soon enough, Bo Nix. We'll talk more about that tomorrow as well. Appreciate you watching and listening. However you did that, if you liked what you saw, please go ahead and click the little like and subscribe. You can send that, and then once you click that, you'll be able to get notified about whatever we'll talk about on any given day. You'll get notifications in advance, and we'll let you know as soon as we go live every single day. So appreciate every one of you who's already listening that way and is subscribed. It really does to make a difference for us, and it makes a difference for you too. So thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to Danny Bailey, the man that makes all of this work. He's the reason that everything looks so good, including, as much as you can do with this. So thanks a lot, Danny, for all of that. We will be back tomorrow, but you don't have to go anywhere. Again, live, local, independent for like 25 years. This is the spot. It's Mile High Sports.